So glad to have you with us on Curiosity, Not Judgment. Welcome. My name is Virga.
And I'm Gary.
All right, so we have been on this roll talking about AI the last couple of weeks, and I don't want to go too much farther down that trail. However, there was some important developments that have happened, and today, of all days, there was some new news that came out, and today being the 16th of May. And so, Gary, I'm going to let you just start off by sharing some of the things that you encountered in terms of just the aspects around AI that even the creator has now realized may need to be regulated.
Yeah, now there's not one creator, but Sam Altman is the CEO of OpenAI and is a big instigator of things to come. First of all, welcome, and you're in good company listening to this because obviously Congress has decided to take up this banner also, directly as a result of this podcast.
I'm sure, yeah, Congress is listening.
Anyway. Yeah, Sam Altman came before Congress today, and it was funny because I saw this flash across my news screen, and it said, "Hey, this could go very wrong, and we are here seeking the government's help in regulating to make sure it doesn't go wrong," which prompted Senator Durbin to say, "Wow, rarely do we have industry come to us and ask for more regulation. And in general, I think the regulation in a free market society is bad. However, we want to protect people and we want to protect things from going wrong. One of the references that they're talking about is jobs. Now, throughout history, technology has generally created more jobs than it has eliminated, with the caveat that people have had to retrain. And so there is a retraining effort that has to go on. But we may be on the brink of things happening that go against the grain on that. An example is EVs. With the invention of the automobile, whole industries, from maintenance to sales, have erupted over the decades and centuries even. But now EVs have far less moving parts, and so there may be much less need for mechanics. OpenAI has the ability to take away jobs that have to do with researching and creating content. Now, will this create more jobs on the other end? I don't think anybody knows.
Right.
But this is the fear: is just take jobs alone. This could have a deleterious effect on the economy and on the country.
Yeah. I find it fascinating that it's that notion of I've created something, our company has created something that is a really incredible, powerful tool, but we are also understanding that in a blink of an eye, this could get out of control and it could be more detrimental than it is helpful. And, it's like fire, right? Fire is this incredible tool. When properly contained, it warms a home, it cooks your food. But the second it escapes its containment, it devastates communities and burns up forests, and the destructive power is exponential the farther it spreads. And so I'm seeing AI almost in this category. And just the fascination for me is the fact that the CEO is now asked, like, hey, I need some guardrails. I need guardrails around this, and I need my government to step in and say something and to create some parameters. On that token, I'm going to read something. One of our listeners had sent a really important comment, I thought, to one of the last episodes, and I'm going to pick it up about halfway through. Forgive me for looking at my phone, but I wanted to quote this verbatim. So this is our viewer 246 Toothpicks. So hello. One thing he or she says, one thing I am concerned about is the creation of psychological profiles of individuals and groups of individuals. It is possible to take someone's data and metadata from online and other sources and weave a pretty accurate picture of their thoughts and psychological makeup. I fear that ordinary citizens can be caught in the crossfire of adversarial nation states looking to disrupt and destabilize each other's economies and resources, and who are able to target groups with tailored messaging to achieve these aims. And so again, the incredible potential for creation and inspiration and creativity, coupled with the potential for unbridled, out of control, runaway content and no, I'm looking for a word that's escaping my mind right now, but just that potential to turn this tool into a weapon.
Well, you accurately say it's a tool, and all tools can be used for good or bad. And I think that that's the key. I like the way you talk about containment and things that are very positive and have very positive effects and outcomes can be dangerous and have negative outcomes if not properly contained. So I think that is where we need to figure out what are the rules and regulations necessary. And in general, rules and regulations I think can be constrictive and they can be detrimental to the growth of good things also. And so, and I'm one of those believers that think that government should be, coming from the semiconductor industry, a substrate upon which industry and the free market can grow things. And so from a support and an encouragement standpoint, what can we do? But then what can we do to make sure that it doesn't kind of get out of its container? I think those are wise words and ways to frame the issue. I guess preemptive regulations is what scares me. If I didn't think, and a wildfire is a good analogy, if I thought we could watch it and see where things would happen down the road, and when we start seeing negative effects, then contain it, I would rather do that than preemptively come up with rules against fears which may never come true.
Sure.
However, if we believe that this is something that could explode faster than rules could catch up, then we have to be a little proactive.
Yeah. As in wildfire containment, you can dig your trenches, dig your lines, make some assumptions that it's not going to pass a particular barrier, but a shift of the wind, adverse environmental conditions, and that thing has hopped the line and it keeps on going. And so, yeah, I hear what you're saying, that preemptive strike of containment and regulation and guardrails on one hand is a little bit scary because you don't want government to have an overreach and to overstep their bounds. However, as we are talking about how quickly this could spiral out of control, there is a little bit of fear factor, which often, unfortunately, drives policy.
Now, I will remind ourselves that many new technologies have these fears.
Sure.
And like Mark Twain once said, over my life, I have had many fears, most of which have never come true.
Yes.
And so we have to be a little careful. Is this just like any other technology that we've witnessed in the past? And are we being a little too careful on this one versus others? Are there counter trends that will come and make this thing nice and manageable? I don't know. I was talking to my grandson, and we had asked last time some curious questions about academia and how they're handling this. And I asked him, I said, so is ChatGPT, ChatON, some of these other AI engines, are they allowed in the classroom? And he says, the answer is yes and no. And I said, what do you mean? He says, well, some professors are like, hey, this is a tool. I'm trying to teach you how to use tools and get along in the real world, and it's one of the tools that's out there, so you should use it. Other ones are like, absolutely not, do not do anything. And they mention that the same thing that they use now for plagiarism can now tell if something's been written by AI. I'm not totally sure about that, but let's just say that's true for a moment. They're saying it's forbidden, some professors. So and I asked, do you know of a overall school policy? This is just one university, one data point. And he said, absolutely not. There's, as far as he knows as a student, there is not an overall school policy except apparently, or at least effectively, to let each professor determine it in each classroom. And so, I guess I bring that up because the plagiarism software can now adapt and see if it's been AI, if AI was used. So one could argue, and this is the same thing that cyber deals with all the time with hackers, black hats versus white hats. Can the white hats stay ahead of the black hats? And so we have to determine, is that sufficient?
Right, right. I'm going to change to a different technology for a moment, just because I think maybe the bigger conversation is control before or try to contain after. And maybe that ends up kind of being the theme of this conversation. But one of the topics that I've been discussing with family and friends as of late is social media, especially for children under the age of 18. And the invention of social media and all of the positive things it did with, like, hey, I've now connected with my high school colleagues that I haven't seen in 20 years, may have now been outshadowed by the mental health crisis that has dominated our landscape with social media. This is now one of those curious questions, causation versus correlation, right? And I'm not going to pretend I'm the subject matter expert on this. However, I do know that we've got skyrocketing rates of depression and suicide and mental health crises and loneliness among our teens and our young adults. And so much so that there's actually been some exploration about what would it look like. I think England is experimenting, and no policy has been made to my knowledge, but there are some nations that are experimenting, like what would happen if we say no cell phone usage for somebody under the age of 18? Would that curb the mental health crisis? And so now you've got this little tool, right? You've got this tool that can be used for extraordinary good. I just was in Europe for 2 weeks, and if I wouldn't have had this tool, I would have been in big trouble with navigation and all kinds of other things, right? And yet left unchecked or put in the hands of somebody that cannot adequately self-regulate, it can become detrimental. And so, whose job is it to regulate? And does it happen with the invention and the establishment of a new technology in our community, or does it have to be us trying to contain the wildfire after it's already gotten out?
I'm one of those that believes that the right answer to who should be in charge of regulating this, or who should be in charge of making sure this doesn't get out of hand, that answer shouldn't be government. I would hope that we are still, as a species, able to regulate ourselves with the help of friends and family and loved ones. I'm not saying we do this on our own, but in community, we ought to be able to self-regulate. And find out and figure out what's good for. And I'm also of the belief that one thing that's good for one person is not good for another.
That's
I
correct.
think that there are many people who use this little thing that we call a tool very effectively and always for good, and has 90% good outcomes. Nothing's 100%. But there are people who are using it 90% bad outcomes.
Absolutely.
And what do? Do we address the individual, or do we try to clamp down the tool so that no one uses it improperly? This is not just cell phones.
No.
This is not just AI. This is everything.
Sure.
Including fire and gasoline and things like that.
Weapons,
so,
fill in the blank.
Even speech.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
I mean, we live in a country where free speech is one of our tenets, but you're not allowed to yell fire in a crowded theater.
Sure.
So, what are the rules and regulations? Do we need to experience it before we allow somebody else to regulate us, or wouldn't it be nice if we regulated ourselves? One of the things that we used to say in my early days at Intel is, you don't want the government's help. In other words, you don't figure it out on your own, so that you don't need help from someone to come in and do it for you.
Yeah.
Because that answer is generally bad. Not that government is bad or the people in government is bad, but that they have to almost control to the lowest possible level, which in general takes away freedoms from people who don't have the issue.
Yeah.
It's punish the many for the sins of a few.
Yep.
And I think that that's unfortunately one of the only sticks or tools that the government has is that regulation, which we have to decide, is that a good thing or a bad thing? I guess what I'm saying is, can we self-regulate? With respect to social media, can we as a family say, okay, this is too much for you until you're age 12, we really want to limit it to this, and 14, and then again, kids and curfews and things like that we've all been doing for millennia are different for each kid.
Sure.
But should that be done at the family level? Should that be done at the community level? Should it be done at the state level, the federal level? There's a lot of arguments about what things should be controlled at what level.
Well, and then I might question, my curious mental path on this is, you know, in your bell curve, you had your early adopters, you know, you got to a point where the majority of the community is now using cell phones, accessing social media. You've gotten so far past that tipping point that you've got, I'm making up a number, but let's say 90% of people are active cell phone users and active social media users. Because it is so far widespread, you know, maybe you decide that your child shouldn't have access to it, but it's so proliferated our community and our environment and the things that we're doing. If it's not regulated at a higher level, are you then kind of cutting the legs off of your child to be able to function in a particular capacity? And I think about specifically how many homework assignments and how many teacher connections, how many group projects are now all cell phone based, and especially exponentially through COVID, right? When kids were no longer in a classroom, maybe you as a parent recognize that there's some inherent dangers with cell phone use and social media use, and yet the school assignment is all technology based in those very platforms that you want to help limit. And so I'm not necessarily arguing, I'm thinking through these things that maybe we have gone past the point of no return where even a well-intentioned parent trying to help regulate within the construct of a family may be, their will may not be the one that takes precedence because it's crept into so many areas of our education and culture.
Sure, and again, we need to deal within the world in which we live.
Yes.
And so we have to play the cards that we're all dealt. And,
Yes.
and what you're describing is that tipping point, that what we would call a ratchet. In other words, there's no return. So the tool being everywhere and being used for normal world functions, you're not going to be able to put that toothpaste basket back in the tube.
Sure.
However, how we use that is still an option. And, you know, I'm not suggesting this, but you as a parent could look at your child's cell phone once a week, every night, and see what's on there.
Yeah.
Right? If that were a concern for you, and if you wanted only certain apps to be used, because they could still use it to communicate with their teacher. Although it wasn't very long ago when we didn't have cell phones. There's other ways to communicate. But if the teacher only chooses to communicate by cell phone or email, then, you know, then that cat is out of the bag, so to speak, and so there's no way to go back on that. But there's always ways to regulate on a local level, including in a family. Plus, there's ways that we can exert influence, not control.
Yeah.
And so, wouldn't it be nice if, as a family, we sit down and make family decisions about what we're going to do with with each of these tools and decide as a family?
Right. See, and now in the present application, that seems reasonable, rational. I can think through how that would play out for real family discussion. With AI, I can't really think through that yet because I just don't know where it's going to go. And so, you know, now we're back to that point in the conversation of regulate before or try to control after. And as you said, you know, once the cat's out of the bag or the toothpaste out of the tube, good luck getting that back in.
Yeah, and this is what we have to be concerned about. And that's the whole point of this discussion is to ask those questions.
Yep.
And I think to consistently ask the questions at this point with AI, because here's the other thing. We don't know what we don't know. We don't know, is AI going to create more jobs than it eliminates? We don't know if it can get to a point where it's too late and it takes over and does things that we don't want it to and we can't control it.
Yeah, or to the point of our commenter, you know, if it ends up profiling us as a target for a foreign entity that wishes us harm.
Profiling is a whole nother discussion point.
Yes, it is.
You know, I always say, you know, if you think you have privacy,
Guess again.
You're not listening. You're not being aware. But you know, and I sometimes make the joke, well, you know, I'm glad I'm just a grandpa now. It doesn't do anything bad anymore because I know I don't have privacy. I think it's interesting. I saw a meme recently that said, you know, dance like no one's watching, but make your social media comments as if they're going to be read in court someday.
Ooh.
And it's true.
Yeah.
You know, and I think an awareness of that, we have to understand that things that we do online are going to be tracked and they're going to be used.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want positive results from that, well, then you probably ought to be thinking and thoughtful and intentional about what you do on social media. Now,
For sure.
there's not a big leap to say that just means think before you speak,
Mm-hmm.
which we've been dealing with for all of mankind,
Yes.
human history.
Yep.
So I think that being intentional about how we use tools, being intentional about what we say and do, are still going to work no matter what happens.
Yes, those are excellent comments. I still am, my brain goes in a million different directions with the whole AI application, and, be mindful of what you say, do, and ask with AI. I don't yet know what that's going to look like, and the fact that it can profile you based on how you're using it, what you're asking, what engagement, what level of engagement you're participating in that world, and so it's mind-boggling to me. And we can look back now at the social media profiling and blueprint, and we have had conversations about the algorithms associated with that, and AI is now, ramps it up to a whole new level. And so
it's like putting Miracle-Gro on all of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as always, we've solved nothing, but we've asked 100 new questions.
That's the whole point.
That is the whole point. For us to stay curious and to be very aware of what is happening in our own lives, in our families, in our communities, and then, more largely, I suppose, now in our government and the things that are being now asked and introduced by companies and how that's going to impact your life. So some fascinating conversation once again.
We'll have to watch and see how it unfolds.
Yeah, absolutely. As always, we really do love your comments, and thank you to our buddy who keeps commenting. And I love the thoughtful responses. And so whether you are commenting on YouTube or one of the other platforms, I will admit I've been pretty negligent in our Facebook page, but I can try to get back engaged on that. So however you want to contact us, feel free. The main repository is curiositynotjudgment.com. You can comment directly there on the page and then see some of the other places that we are linked up as well. So thank you so much. Keep thinking, keep being curious, and we'll see you next time.
Take care.